After 18 months in a classified hellhole, all I wanted was a hug from my mom. But instead, I found the locks changed and my cousin sitting at the head of the table. They laughed when I told them I didn't have a normal job, unaware that the only reason they still had a roof over their heads was the combat pay I wired anonymously every single month. My name is Sofia Thomas, and for the better part of the last decade, I have lived two completely different lives. To the United States military, I am a highly specialized officer entrusted with logistics and intelligence operations that most people only see in movies. To my family, however, I am the black sheep, the wanderer, the woman who couldn't cut it in the corporate world and disappeared to find herself. It was a lie I maintained for their safety and for the sake of operational security, but I never imagined that my silence would be weaponized against me by the very people I was sacrificing everything to protect. The flight home was a blur of exhaustion and decompression. I sat in the cramped economy seat of a civilian airliner, dressed in baggy sweatpants and a worn-out hoodie, staring out the window at the clouds. My body was present, but my mind was still 7,000 miles away, lingering in the arid heat and the high-stakes pressure of the command center I had just left. I hadn't slept properly in 3 days. The only thing keeping me upright was the vision of my parents' front porch in Ohio, the smell of my mother's pot roast, and the quiet comfort of the home I grew up in. I hadn't been able to communicate with them for nearly 6 months due to the sensitivity of my latest deployment. That silence is hard on families, I knew that. But I also knew my parents. They were sturdy, old-school people who believed in resilience. Or at least they used to be. When the taxi dropped me off at the end of the driveway, the house looked different. The grass was a little too long. The flower beds, usually my mother's pride and joy, were overrun with weeds. A sense of unease pricked at the back of my neck, a sensation I had learned to trust in the field. I hoisted my duffel bag, the only luggage I had carried with me from the base, and walked up the concrete path. I reached for my key, the brass familiar against my thumb, and slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking maybe the humidity had swollen the wood, but the mechanism felt wrong. It was new. The shiny nickel finish of the deadbolt glared at me. I knocked. Then I pounded. The door swung open, but it wasn't my father or mother standing there. It was Julian, my cousin Julian. He was wearing a crisp polo shirt tucked into beige chinos, looking like he had just stepped off a golf course, though I knew for a fact Julian hadn't played a sport in his life. He held a glass of iced tea, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and sneering condescension. "Sophia?" he asked, not stepping aside to let me in. "We thought you were, well, we didn't know where you were. We assumed you were backpacking through Europe or something equally aimless." "I'm home, Julian," I said, my voice raspy from the dry air of the plane. "Let me in. Where are Mom and Dad?" He hesitated, blocking the doorway with his body. "They're in the living room. But listen, before you go in there, we need to set some ground rules. Things have changed while you were off playing Nomad." I didn't have the patience for this. I pushed past him, my duffel bag knocking against his shin. He yelped, spilling a bit of tea, but I was already moving down the hallway. The house smelled different. It didn't smell like pot roast. It smelled like bleach and stale medicine, an antiseptic odor that made my stomach turn. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. I found them in the living room. My father was sitting in his recliner, but he looked smaller than I remembered. His skin was papery, and his hands trembled as they rested on the armrests. My mother was on the sofa, looking frail, her eyes clouded with confusion.
If you are enjoying the story, please like and subscribe. Also, please comment, as your feedback helps to improve the stories coming.
Sitting across from them, with a notepad on her lap, was Aunt Brenda, Julian's mother. "Sophia?" my mother whispered, squinting as if I were a ghost. "Is that you?" I dropped my bag and rushed to her, falling to my knees to wrap my arms around her. I felt her ribs through her sweater. She felt fragile, like a dried flower that might crumble if I held on too tight. "Mom, it's me. I'm back. I'm so sorry I was gone so long." Brenda cleared her throat loudly. "Well, look who finally decided to show up. We were just discussing the estate planning. It's convenient you arrived now, I suppose, though I doubt you have much to contribute." I pulled back and looked at my father. "Dad, what's going on? Why are the locks changed? Why is Julian answering the door?" My father sighed, a sound that rattled in his chest. "Sophia, your cousin has been helping us. Since I got sick, things have been hard. Julian has a head for business. He's been managing the accounts." Managing the accounts? I stood up, the soldier in me taking over the confused daughter. I had been sending money, significant amounts of money. My combat pay, my hazard pay, my housing allowance. Almost 70% of my paycheck went into a specific account I had set up years ago, an account that was supposed to auto-draft their mortgage and medical bills. I looked at Julian, who had followed me into the room and was now leaning against the doorframe with a smug grin. "What do you mean, managing?" Julian stepped forward, placing a hand on my father's shoulder. "Uncle Robert has been confused lately, Sophia. The dementia is setting in, and with Aunt Mary's hip surgery bills piling up, they were drowning. I stepped in. I consolidated their debts. I'm handling the creditors." I narrowed my eyes. "There shouldn't be debts. I've been sending—" I stopped. I couldn't say it. Not yet. My status was still classified. I couldn't just blurt out that I was a high-ranking officer in an intelligence unit. I had to maintain the cover until I was officially debriefed and transitioned, which wouldn't happen for another week. "You've been sending what? Postcards?" Brenda scoffed. She stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Let's be real, Sophia. You're 30 years old, you have no husband, no career, no assets. You disappear for months at a time to God knows where. We assume you're working odd jobs, maybe bartending or manual labor. You're a drifter." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I am not a drifter. I have a job, a very important job. "Oh, sure," Julian laughed. "Is it an entrepreneurial venture, multi-level marketing?" "Sophia, look at you. You're wearing clothes that look like they came from a donation bin. You look exhausted and unkempt. Meanwhile, I've been here, every day, making sure your parents don't lose this house." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The only reason the bank hadn't foreclosed 3 years ago was because I paid off the lump sum arrears when I made captain. The only reason they had health insurance for the hip surgery was because I paid the premiums from a shell account. "I need to stay here," I said, my voice steady. "I need a shower and a bed." Julian shook his head. "That's the thing, cuz. We've turned your old room into an office. I need a space to work when I'm managing their portfolio, and honestly, we can't have you freeloading here. It's bad for their stress levels." My father looked down at his lap, unable to meet my eyes. "Sophia, Julian says it's for the best. He says we need stability." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My own father, the man who taught me to ride a bike and shoot a rifle, was deferring to this snake in a polo shirt. "Dad, this is my home." "Not anymore," Brenda said coldly. "You can sleep on the couch for tonight, but tomorrow you need to find a motel. We have a lot of work to do to save this family from financial ruin, and we don't need a failure distracting us." That night, I lay on the lumpy floral sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling fan. I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, connecting dots that I hadn't seen before because I was too far away. The changed locks, the new car in the driveway that I realized must be Julian's, a luxury SUV that cost more than my parents' house, the way my mother looked at Brenda with fear. I pulled out my secure phone, the one they didn't know I had, and logged into the bank interface. I navigated to the hidden account I used for them. The transfers had gone through. Every month. $3,000, $5,000, it was all there. So where did the money go? I began to dig. I spent the next 3 days playing the role they expected of me, the silent, sullen failure. I slept on the couch. I ate their leftovers and I endured their insults. The escalation of their cruelty was subtle at first, then blatant. One evening over dinner, Julian decided to hold court. He sat at the head of the table, my father's seat, while my parents sat on the sides, picking at their food. I was relegated to a folding chair at the corner. "So, Sophia," Julian began, slicing into a steak that I was fairly certain was bought with my father's pension money, "have you thought about applying at the grocery store? I heard they're hiring baggers. It's honest work, might teach you some responsibility." I kept my eyes on my plate. "I'm looking into some options, Julian." Brenda chimed in, pouring herself a large glass of wine. "We just want you to be a productive member of society, dear. It's embarrassing, really. When people ask how the Thomas girl is doing, I have to invent stories. I tell them you're volunteering in Africa. It sounds better than unemployed and homeless." My mother looked at me with sad, watery eyes. "Sophia, maybe you could ask Julian for advice. He's so successful. He's a consultant, you know." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. "What exactly do you consult on, Julian?" He waved his fork dismissively. "Efficient resource allocation, corporate restructuring, high-level stuff. You wouldn't understand the nuance." I understood nuance better than he could ever imagine. I understood that resource allocation, in his case, likely meant moving my parents' money into his pockets. The breaking point began to form on a Tuesday. I was alone in the house with my parents while Julian and Brenda were out running errands. I saw the mailman arrive and went to the box before Julian could intercept it. Inside, I found a stack of envelopes. Most were junk, but one was from the county clerk's office. Another was from a local law firm. I opened the letter from the court. It was a notice of a competency hearing, petition for conservatorship. Petitioner, Julian Miller. Subjects, Robert and Mary Thomas. I read the document, my hands shaking with a cold fury I hadn't felt since my convoy was ambushed in the Nally. Julian wasn't just managing their money, he was trying to legally strip them of their autonomy. The petition claimed that my parents were suffering from advanced dementia, were unable to care for themselves, and were being financially drained by their estranged and unstable daughter, Sophia. It accused me of theft. It claimed I was the one stealing their assets. It painted a picture of my parents as helpless invalids and Julian as the savior stepping in to protect the estate. If granted, this order would give Julian total control over their house, their bank accounts, their life insurance, and their medical decisions. He would have the power to put them in a state-run facility and sell the house I had paid for. I walked back inside. My father was watching a game show, oblivious. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low, "do you know what a conservatorship is?" He looked at me, confusion knitting his brows. "A what?" "No. Julian handles the paperwork, honey. He says it's just to help with the taxes." "He lied to you, Dad." Before he could respond, the front door opened. Julian and Brenda walked in, laughing. When they saw me holding the mail, the laughter stopped dead. "Give me that," Julian snapped, lunging forward. I stepped back, holding the papers high. "You're trying to have them declared incompetent? You're trying to take the house?" "It's for their own good," Brenda yelled, her face flushing red. "You wouldn't understand, you selfish girl. They are sick. They need professional management, not a daughter who abandons them." "I'm not abandoning them. I'm the one paying for this roof," I shouted, finally losing my temper. Julian laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You? Paying? You don't have a dime, Sophia. We've seen your bank statements, or rather, the lack thereof. You're a ghost. You don't exist on paper." He was right, in a way. My official civilian footprint was minimal by design. My assets were held in blind trusts or military credit unions that didn't show up on a standard credit check. He had mistaken my operational security for poverty. "You're going to leave," Julian said, stepping close to me, his voice dropping to a menace. "You're going to pack your trash bag and get out. The hearing is in 2 days. Once the judge signs that order, I'll have the sheriff throw you out for trespassing." I looked at my parents. They were huddled together on the couch, terrified by the shouting. They didn't defend me. They couldn't. They were too broken, too brainwashed by months of Julian's poison. "Fine," I said. "I'll leave." I grabbed my duffel bag and walked out. I didn't go to a motel. I went to the nearest military base, a generic reserve center about 2 hours away where I knew the base commander. I needed to make some calls. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. I contacted my commanding officer. I contacted the Judge Advocate General's office. I pulled bank records going back 5 years. I requested declassification of my service record for the purpose of a legal proceeding, a request that was granted due to the compassionate nature of the emergency. I didn't sleep. I operated on caffeine and righteous anger. I printed spreadsheets. I highlighted transfers. I built a paper trail so dense and undeniable it could stop a tank. The morning of the hearing was gray and rainy. The courthouse was a dour brick building in the center of town. I arrived early, entering through a side door to avoid being seen by Julian or Brenda in the lobby. I went into the bathroom to change. I didn't wear the sweatpants. I didn't wear a pantsuit. I put on my service dress blue uniform. I carefully pinned the ribbons to my chest, the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, the campaign ribbons. I adjusted my rank insignia on my shoulders, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a senior officer. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the tired, baggy-clothed daughter who had been sleeping on a couch. She was a warrior. I pulled my hair back into a tight regulation bun and placed my cover on my head. I walked toward courtroom 3B. When I entered, the proceedings were just about to begin. My parents were sitting at the plaintiff's table next to Julian and his expensive-looking lawyer. Brenda was in the front row of the gallery, looking smug. They didn't see me come in at first. Judge Harrison was reading through the file. "All right, we're here for the matter of the Thomas conservatorship. The petitioner alleges that Mr. and Mrs. Thomas are incapacitated and that their daughter, Sofia Thomas, is a financial liability and unfit to assist. Is the daughter present?" Julian's lawyer stood up. "No, Your Honor. Miss Thomas is a transient. We believe she has fled the jurisdiction. She has no fixed address and no employment." "I am here, Your Honor." My voice rang out, clear and commanding, the command voice I used to direct battalions. The entire room turned. The silence that followed was absolute. I marched down the center aisle. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was a rhythmic, sharp percussion. I saw Julian's jaw literally drop. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My parents stared, their eyes wide, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. I walked through the gate and stood at the defense table. I removed my cover and tucked it under my left arm. "Sofia Thomas, Your Honor," I stated. "Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army. I am representing myself and opposing this petition." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked over the top of her lenses. She looked at my uniform. She looked at my ribbons. Then she looked at Julian, who was suddenly sweating profusely. "Lieutenant Colonel," the judge asked, "the petition states you are unemployed." "The petition is fraudulent, Your Honor," I said, placing a thick binder on the table, "as is the petitioner." Julian's lawyer tried to object. "Your Honor, this is theatrics. A costume doesn't change the facts of the case." I didn't look at the lawyer. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, for the past 6 years, I have been deployed on classified operations. Due to the nature of my work, my financial support to my family was routed through blind trusts to ensure their safety. My cousin, Mr. Miller, was aware that I was sending money, but he concealed the source from my parents, intercepted the bank statements, and funneled the fund into his own accounts under the guise of management fees." I opened the binder. "Tab A, Your Honor. Wire transfers totaling $4,500 a month, every month for 60 months. Tab B, the mortgage statements showing that these payments were made directly by me, not Mr. Miller." Mr. Miller's personal bank records, which I obtained via subpoena yesterday, showing deposits matching the withdrawal amounts from my parents' pension fund, a fund he claimed was empty. Julian stood up, his face red. "She's lying! She's hacked my accounts! This is illegal! Sit down, Mr. Miller," the judge barked. She turned her gaze back to me, her expression softening into respect mixed with intense curiosity. You have proof of embezzlement? I do, Your Honor. And I have proof of competency. My parents are not invalid. They are heartbroken and manipulated. They were told I was a failure, so they would rely on him. They were told they were broke, so they would sign over power of attorney. This was a systematic isolation campaign designed to liquidate their assets. I turned to my parents. Dad, Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you where I was, but I never left you. I paid for the hip surgery. I paid off the house 2 years ago. You don't owe anyone a cent. My mother started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. My father looked from me to Julian, the fog in his eyes clearing for the first time in weeks. He stood up, shaky but determined. Your Honor? My father said, his voice cracking. Yes, Mr. Thomas. Is it true? Did she pay for the house? The judge flipped through the binder I had provided. According to these notarized bank documents, yes, the mortgage was satisfied in full by a Sofia Thomas in 2021. My father turned to Julian. You told me the bank was threatening to take it. You told me we had to sell. Julian stammered. Uncle Robert, it's complicated. Finances, I was trying to leverage the equity. My father raised his hand, and for a second I saw the man who had raised me. Get away from me, he growled. The rest of the hearing was a massacre. The judge didn't just dismiss the petition, she alerted the district attorney's office immediately. Julian's lawyer actually requested to withdraw from the case mid-hearing once he realized he was inadvertently part of a fraud scheme. When the gavel banged, it sounded like justice. The aftermath in the hallway was something I will never forget. Julian tried to bolt, but 2 bailiffs were waiting for him. The judge had issued a bench warrant for fraud based on the evidence I presented. I watched as they handcuffed him. He looked at me, his eyes full of hate. You think you're a hero, he spat. You're just a grunt. I'm the grunt who pays your legal fees now, Julian, I said calmly. Or rather, the state will. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped out the back the moment the handcuffs came out. I turned to my parents. They were standing by the window, looking terrified to approach me. I was still in uniform, still imposing, still the lieutenant colonel. I softened my stance, letting my shoulders drop, and walked over to them. Mom, Dad, I said gently. My mother reached out and touched the fabric of my jacket.
It's real, she whispered. You're really an officer?
Yes, Mom. Why didn't you tell us? My father asked. Why let us think you were nothing? Because my job is dangerous, Dad. People who know what I do can become targets. And partly because I didn't think it mattered. I thought you knew I loved you. I thought the money taking care of you was enough. I was wrong. I should have been here. My father shook his head, tears in his eyes. No, we should have trusted you. We let him get in our heads. He made us feel so old, Sophia, so useless. He pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my shoulder. I smelled the mothballs on his old suit, but underneath that, I smelled him, my dad. I'm so proud of you, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'm so proud. We left the courthouse together. I drove them home in the rental car I had picked up, a sensible sedan, not a luxury SUV. The days that followed were difficult, but healing. We had to untangle the financial mess Julian left behind, but with my documentation, it was straightforward. We filed police reports, we changed the locks again. This time, I kept the key. I took 30 days of leave. I spent it gardening with my mother, pulling the weeds that had overgrown her flowers. I spent it sitting on the porch with my father, explaining as much as I could about my career without breaking clearance. I told them about the leadership, the logistics, the people I had helped. I replaced the memories of the drifter with the reality of the woman I had become. Julian is currently serving a 5-year sentence for elder abuse, fraud, and embezzlement. Aunt Brenda tried to call once, asking for money, claiming she didn't know what Julian was doing. I hung up on her. I'm back on deployment now, in another dusty part of the world. But things are different. Every Sunday, I have a video call with my parents. They sit in front of the computer, looking healthy and happy. My dad wears a hat that says, Army Dad, and my mom tells me about the garden.
They don't call me a failure anymore, and more importantly, they know they are safe, not just because I send money, but because they know their daughter is out there, standing watch, ready to come home and fight for them whenever they need me. I walked into that courtroom in uniform to prove a point to a judge, but I walked out of it having saved my family, and that is the most successful mission of my career.